saw the Cinema Novo series at Museum of Modern Art. I think it was 1969, 1970. And I saw there Terran Trans Land in Anguish. And, also was Fuzi's. But Land in Anguish was very, very strong. I felt I'd never seen anything quite like the combination of styles and, quite honestly, just the humanity and the passion of the film was so powerful. So when Antonio das Mortes opened at the Bleecker Street Cinema, and I saw the name Russia, I went immediately to see this. And I don't think at that time, you have to understand it's a very different time. At that time, every day, or maybe I exaggerate, every 3 days, there was a new masterpiece. From Italy, from France, from Japan, from everywhere. I mean, it was all over. And all of a sudden, Antonio das Mortes comes on the screen and wipes them all away. And I can only say this from an emotional standpoint because I don't have the intellectual background of understanding the politics and understanding the nature of what was going on in Brazil at the time. I really come from a working class background of Sicilians in the Lower East Side of New York, which was like living in a little village, until I went to Washington Square College, which was New York University, which was in Greenwich Village. And then I began to open up a little bit, and this extraordinary influx of films, of recreating, you have to understand, not just good movies, but recreating cinematic language was happening every 3 or 4 days from different parts of the country. Not even to mention Andy Warhol or Cassavetes, for example. This was the key in 1968, actually 1959 with Shadows. So this was a time when we all expected anything could happen with cinema, and cinema was going to be the savior of the world in a sense, and the world being in a terrible state, maybe not as bad as it is now, but at that time a very bad state politically and in every way. And so when I saw Antonio das Mortes, it seemed to cut through all politics, made politics irrelevant in a way, because it dealt with a truth and a passion that was primal. That was, there are those who have and those who have not. And those who have not will be heard, and eventually will come from the earth. It's almost as if it's something that was from primeval times, where the people in the film look as if they came out of the earth. This is like a primal mythology that was created up there on the screen, but interestingly enough, not just from the tradition and the culture of Brazil, which was kind of new to me, but also from different cultures and different different styles of filmmaking. From Italy, from America, from the American Western, as translated through the Italian Western, which at that time, we were such diehard American Western enthusiasts, having grown up with them as young boys, John Ford, Howard Hawks, etc., Bud Bedecker, and of course at that time Sam Peckinpah was the final statement of the American Western. We were so at that time so militant about the American Western that we reacted, myself and a number of other people reacted against the Leone films. We felt that, the Italians can't make Italian. I love Antonioni, we love Fellini, we love De Sica, of course, Bertolucci, Bellocchio, so much Pasolini, but the Western, this is American. It took me, in the meantime I saw Antonio das Mortes, but I did not have that feeling about Antonio. Antonio das Mortes is something different. It took elements of the Western, it took elements of the translation of the Western by Leone and the other Italians. It took me 4 years to begin to appreciate, 4 or 5 years to begin to appreciate really beyond that point, the Leone films. And that Once Upon a Time in the West then became one of my favorite films, and I had to learn to come to it that it was not a Western, that it's an Italian film, that it's more in the tradition of grand opera. And Leone's style was so extraordinary and so unique. And that it took me a number of years. I got to know Leone, and then actually, at one point, back in 1978, gave me a print of Once Upon a Time in the West, which I kept here with our collection. But the thing about Antonio das Mortes was that, yes, it takes elements of the American Western, but also translated through the Italian Western at that time. There were, how can I say, I can't I could not react to the picture analytically, because I was overwhelmed by the film, and I was overwhelmed by the style of the film, and by, again, just the truth over politics. And what I mean by that is that the politics are there, it's obvious, but I hadn't seen it handled with such honesty and in such an interesting way. And I hadn't seen it handled that way since I saw the first neorealist films of De Sica and Rossellini when I was 5 years old, which was Bicycle Thief and Paisa. And they were of a different style, but that hit the truth in a certain way, and Antonio hits that way in the same manner. I had a similar feeling to seeing Pasolini's first film, Accattone, around the same time. But Antonio das Mortes goes off on another level, because it comes out, the ritual, even though I may not have been familiar with some of the rituals depicted in the picture, they create an atmosphere where anything is possible. And you could follow the story to a certain extent. You understand the the nature of the story, but the sense of the dispossessed, and the sense of the dispossessed are always with us, and that they will be heard from. This is inevitable, and you get this from his work. You get this in particular Antonio, and also, of course, in Land in Anguish. And so, for me, ultimately, I became obsessed with the film, and I remember I took my friend from Time magazine, Jay Cox, to see it, and he reacted against it, but years later he liked it. There's no day. He was sort of a reviewer. He was reviewing at the time, and you have to understand that reviewers of periodicals have to see 4 or 5 films a day, 3 films a day. You know, suddenly this thing comes on the screen. He thought it was too excessive, too over the. I said, no, this is really important. We got to meet Glauber when he came to New York that time, in a restaurant uptown, just for coffee, and the Time magazine gentleman did an interview of him, and that's when I first met him. And it took a few years, but my friend came around. He was the same. He also, with me, reacted against the Leone films, and then years later it came around. So, but with Antonio das Mortes is something. The style is very important. There are elements, as I say, of the Western, of course, but and this is pretty obvious in terms of the Cangaciero and the type of bandit Americans can immediately, who've seen American cinema, Westerns can immediately equate with that. But it's also there's something about the nature of the music. The music, for me, is narrative in the film. It tells the story, the music. And I became obsessed with the music. I finally got copies of all of it, and I put it on my audio tape. And when I was driving, I was living in Los Angeles in 1972 to 1983, and I played in the car all the time. And the thing about it, I started giving copies of the film to musicians, composers, to look at that time in Los Angeles, actors. But primarily, the thing is that the narrative is told through the music also. Now, I don't know, I'm not an authority on it, so I can't tell you, you know better than me, all the different meanings of the different types of music used in the picture. But there is one important thing, and it has to do with the ballad, the idea of probably one of the most extraordinary things in that film is the moment in which the old blind man is carried on a litter, and the camera just tracks along with him. They're preparing for the final battle, and the camera goes on and on and on and keeps tracking. And this extraordinary ballad is being sung on the track, with these great lyrics about Lampiao, I believe, and going down to hell and fighting all the devils. And come to think of it, we were talking about it the other day, and we were talking about that in a way he, at that time, was using film, using Antonio das Mortes is using cinema sort of as powerful as Bob Dylan, the music and the songs that Bob Dylan was writing and playing at that time, Masters of War, particularly that particular song, that particular ballad, and Antonio das Mortes is like a rolling stone. It just goes, and like if you listen as an American, I don't know about foreigner, but if you listen to like a Rolling Stone repeatedly, which I just did a documentary on Bob Dylan, it still has the power. The song still has the power, and this is something that over the years I began to realize about the use of music in this film. But automatically, I must say, I responded to the film emotionally, and I responded to the truth of the street, the truth of the earth. In other words, as I said, the people who have not will be heard from, and I think this is something that there will be a day of reckoning, and I think this film shows that. And I think all of Cinema Nuovo, I think at that time, was expressing that. I mean, the whole world was going that way, and it is that way now, too. Antonio das Mortes makes it very clear it's the haves and the haves not. You know, you could give or you could take. You could share. And the ones who don't, they're going to come out of from that, wherever they were, Serato is called, the area where the woman with the knife, the extraordinary, the rituals they're enacted, and one of the greatest moments in the picture too is the way the intensity builds with the music. It becomes like a ritual, it becomes like a religious chant or an incantation. There's a moment where an older woman starts singing, and I think it's when Antonio das Mortes starts to fight for the first time with another of the congaceros. They put the handkerchief between themselves. One bites the one end of the handkerchief, the other bites. And I can only say this from an emotional standpoint because I don't have the intellectual background of understanding the politics and understanding the nature of what was going on in Brazil at the time. I really come from a working class background of Sicilians. I saw the Cinema Nuovo in the Lower East Side of New York, which was like living in a little village, until I went to Washington Square College, which was New York University, which was in Greenwich Village. And then it began to open up a little bit, and this extraordinary influx of films, of recreating, you have to understand, not just good movies, but recreating cinematic language was happening every 3 or 4 days from different parts of the country. Not even to mention, Das Mortes opened at the Bleecker Street Cinema, and I saw the name Russia. You know, I went immediately to see this. And I don't think at that time, you have to understand it's a very different time. At that time, every day, or maybe I exaggerate, every 3 days, there was a new masterpiece. From Italy, from France, from Japan, from everywhere. I mean, it was all over. And all of a sudden, Antonio das Mortes comes on the screen and wipes them all away. A series at Museum of Modern Art. I think it was 1969, 1970. And I saw there Terran Trans Land in Anguish. And also was Fuzi's. But Land in Anguish was very, very strong. I felt I had never seen anything quite like the combination of styles and, quite honestly, just the humanity and the passion of the film was so powerful. So when Antonio